Happy Friday. I'm glad you're here. We're going to talk about executive function today, which is a topic I really enjoy talking about. Just because, first, not a lot of us understand or are aware of what that means, which means for our kids with ADHD who struggle with executive function, we may look at their behaviors as being defiant, or we may label them as being lazy or unmotivated. So, this is a topic that I really enjoy um, spreading understanding about. So, what is executive function skills? These are a set of skills and a set of mental processes that just helps us to carry out day-to-day tasks, whether it's short-term goals or even long-term goals. So, how we solve problems, how we make plans, how we manage our own emotions, even. And in general, they're life skills. When we have strong executive function skills, it impacts our mental and physical health and our overall quality of life. And conversely, when we have poor executive function skills, then that affects negatively academics, our vocation, and even our relationships. So, building these skills helps to encourage independence in all settings for our kids. And because these skills are housed in our frontal lobe, so the last part of our brain to develop here, then it's fair to say that everyone up until mid 20s, which is when our brain is fully developed, has an executive function delay or a deficit here. So basically, our brain is still under construction. And for our kids with ADHD, they have 30% delay in their executive function skills. So when we approach them with expectations, directions, homework, we need to view this as a lens from, is this developmentally appropriate for them? Is this a realistic expectation from them? And just having that first lens or that mindset sets our kids up for success, and also uh, maintains our connection with our kids, because when we are continually setting them up for expectations that they struggle with without the right support, then that does create a sense of uh, frustration and disconnection between us and our kids. So let's look at some of these specific skills that encompass executive function skills: planning, organizing, time management, focus and attention, impulse control, task initiation, working memory, cognitive flexibility. So being able to shift between tasks, or being able to even shift from my lens to someone else's perspective to understand them better, is that's part of cognitive flexibility. And then also emotional regulation, being able to manage our own emotions and impulses. And then lastly, self-monitoring, or another word for that is metacognition. So being able to recognize when we make a mistake and pivot, for example, is one. And if you look at that list, most of us still struggle with one or several areas of this list, of those skills. For me, time management is difficult. So I put things in place to mitigate that, instead of explicitly working on my time management skills. Um, at my age, there's bigger fish to fry. And so we need to approach it from, what structures and routines and systems can we set ourselves up to be successful and to remove those barriers. So that leads me to my next topic here. How do we create those systems and structures? So when we approach it in this way, we're approaching it from the bottom up. What are those general, broad areas that we can set up for our kids to succeed? So look at these like, how do we get the most bang for our buck? And this falls under the umbrella of, like I said before, systems and routines to have in place. So these involve keystone habits. And what is one thing that you can do right now? Think of it for yourself or for your child that is a lead domino. And I'll speak personally for myself. I struggle with focusing. I struggle with impulse control. So that looks like maybe grabbing a bag of chips and eating it mindlessly, or putting off doing a report so that I can scroll. I'll be honest, I get very distracted with my phone sometimes. But the lead domino for me happens to be exercise. So exercise, sleep, nutrition, routines, those are the lead dominoes I'm talking about. For me, when I exercise in the morning, I sleep better at night, which means that I'm much more consistent with my routines and structures throughout the next day and the next week even. And also when I'm exercising and sleeping better, then I also eat better. Um, for a couple of reasons. When I'm well rested, I am not seeking that dopamine fix or that stimulation from caffeine or sugar or carbs that many of us and our kids tend to crave. And so, all in all, one key habit here sets the tone for all these other helpful habits to be put down. So think about that for your kids too. Where can you add in movement and exercise? Even 5 or 10 minutes can boost your kids' focus, but also give them the sensory input to regulate their nervous system. So after school, for example, sometimes kids need movement to decompress. Sometimes they need quiet time to decompress. And that comes, knowing the difference comes through observing your child and trialing out some of those activities to see what works. So another along the lines of exercise, sleep, giving them unstructured play, and then also doing so outdoors as much as you can. The difference between playing indoors and outdoors, and play in unstructured play is beneficial, period. But when we can do that outdoors, there's research that shows so much benefit here. Being in nature, having green time, the sensory information that comes from outdoors is much different from indoors, and they're very subtle in different ways. So when you think about, let's say, going to a playground um, or even, gosh, playing indoors, think about the primary colors you tend to see at a child's playground is bright green, bright blue, and there's nothing bad about that. But simply playing in nature, the colors are more subtle. There's secondary and tertiary colors versus just primary colors that are bold and bright. But also the sensory input from the sun or the wind, that's very subtle tactile input to your child's skin. And then also the sound of walking or running outside on leaves or rocks or pavement. All of that gives our nervous system different input. That tends to be more regulating versus overstimulating. Something else that is neat about being outdoors is it engages our default mode network, which is part of our brain that becomes active when we are not engaged in something cognitively demanding. So for our kids, schoolwork is very cognitively demanding. When they are able to play outdoors or do something unstructured, it lets them shift to activating their default mode network, which is very regulating. This is where they um, are able to manage stress. This is when they are engaged or engaging this part of the brain, they're decompressing and they're recharging their mental battery in a sense. So with adding in this unstructured play, understanding that while technology and screen is not bad, having a certain amount, just monitoring their amount of screen time is really important because it takes away from the mind wandering default mode network activation that we just talked about. Our kids need this downtime. We need this downtime. And engaging those regular times of just even a few minutes of unstructured play uh, is a great recharge. And it also helps our kids to learn how to tolerate discomfort and boredom. When we think about screen and how highly stimulating it is for very little effort, for example, video games, we're constantly getting to the next level, next level, next level, very quickly, very high stimulation with fast action scenes or even auditory information. That's very difficult to shift from back to when we turn off the screen, just back to the daily pace of life. And we often see our kids throwing such a bad meltdown because of this. So kids getting off of an iPad or a movie, a lot of times parents will tell me that their kids will just explode, and that's why. So even those in those moments, I just suggest even when your kids on the screen, give them movement during that time. Can you give them an exercise ball to sit on? Can they sit on or stand on a tilt board, even if it's just for a few minutes? Right after screen time, can they go outside and get some energy out, get some movement in their body? Because movement is regulating overall for our nervous system. And something else with our environment. managing our environment so that it sets up our kids for success can be we can just do the simplest of things, even reducing clutter. Um, think about pre-K, kindergarten, first grade, where when you walk in the classroom, there's a ton of clutter on the walls. Um, Even though they're very bright, there'll be a lot of, gosh, decorations. And for me, when I walk in, it feels disorienting to me because there's so much information visually to process that it is overstimulating in a visual sense. So when you think about environment, how can you reduce clutter? Something that we can do is just keeping main areas clear in your home, whether that's the kitchen, the living room. Is it a place that your child can go in and still play, but just having a clear area to do that so that they're not bombarded with so much visual information. So a phrase I like to say is make the easy thing hard and the hard thing easy. Um, with their environment, you can manufacture an environment that is easier to do homework by making it comfortable, making it maybe even near a window versus fluorescent lighting. It could be an area where it is obviously quieter, an area where there's fewer distractions, so not a whole lot of areas where there's walkways around there. Um, and then simplify the transitions for many parents. The morning transitions are so hard. So getting brushing teeth, breakfast, getting clothed, walking out the door, that can be uh, so challenging for our kids and then challenging for ourselves too, as we're managing that stress of that time pressure and that time constraint. So reduce those transitions. What I have found is for my boys, instead of having them leave their room, come downstairs to eat breakfast, go back upstairs to get dressed, go to the other side of the house to brush their teeth, what we found was having looking at the physical map of those transitions, having them come right downstairs to the kitchen to eat, and then having their clothing and toothbrush right in the mudroom so that they can walk to the mudroom after they eat, put on their clothing, brush their teeth in the sink in the mudroom, and then walking out the door. That way, we only had to make one or two physical transitions, and everything was simplified. We modified the point of performance so that there were fewer distractions. So if my kids were supposed or were to go back upstairs to get dressed, they would have had all these other things in their way to get distracted by. Oh, there's my set of Legos. Oh, there's a book I'm going to pick up. And that would make it that much more challenging and frustrating for everyone. Also, something that I found very creative is using creative or multiple sensory modalities. So how do we tend to give instructions verbally? How do we tend to give instructions when they're not followed through the first time? Again, verbally. So a lot of parents, we will get so frustrated by having to repeat ourselves to do something, for our kids to do something. So what I suggest is after the second time, if it doesn't work, switch up the modality. Doesn't mean you have to go over there and physically touch or guide your child if they're not tactily defensive. For example, having my hand on my son's back will remind him, oh, we're supposed to do something. Um, One of the things that I really appreciated from working at an outdoor school, where a lot of the time students are outdoors playing and the teachers are needing to get them back in the classroom, is they'll use one of them uses a bell to ring. Another one uses a recorder and she'll just play it. She'll just kind of do a little tune here. It'll sound something like this, do 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 do. And it's really neat to see all the kids stop and come running to her. And she didn't have to shout, okay, kids, time to come back in. But just hearing this is a very novel sound. It sounds very different from what they're currently doing and hearing. And so it grabs their attention very quickly. So using the auditory system versus um, in a different way helps them to follow through here. And then also visual, using their visual system paired with auditory. So this looks like pictures, lists, visual schedules. All these are so helpful for making our expectations clear, concrete, and also permanent. We're not saying something that goes in one ear and out the other. We have something visual that stays and is a constant reminder, even if we need to point them back to it and physically point or and gesture towards that picture. That helps a lot. And the next one, it seems like common sense that we often fail to or maybe underestimate. And I'm going to and I'm going to say this for myself as well, which I tend to fall short on, but connection, being mindful to connect before redirecting or correcting. We need to always be able to show patience, love, support, but also pair that with accountability and boundaries, helping our kids follow through and offering limits wherever is needed. We need to find a way to respect their autonomy, even when we are frustrated or we have different goals from our kids. And to do this, we need to have our curiosity hat, and we need to wonder why, or what is this behavior? What is the skill gap or the barrier to keeping them from doing what is needed right now? And I'll just give a very quick example. I was walking down the hallway at work, and I noticed there was an adult that was getting frustrated with the child. She was trying to corral the child to one direction, and he kept pulling away, trying to run back. And she was getting frustrated. He was getting frustrated. And they couldn't see this because they were right there in the middle of it, but I was further away. Well, the child had lost his shoe. As they were walking, it slipped off, and he was trying to run back and get the shoe, and he's nonverbal, so he couldn't say that. And the adult didn't see this, so she was getting frustrated, thinking the child was just trying to run off. And this is why it is so important to just slow down. And instead of assuming a child is being defiant, we need to ask ourselves, why is he pulling away and running away from me? And just that pause in observing, using our observation skills, can sometimes mitigate the problem before there is even a problem. So when she realized that this child had lost a shoe, she just turned around and went with him. And uh, like, this is something we all need to be reminded of slowing down and looking for that why. And with that said, another common sense suggestion here is being able to connect with our kids, meaning that we need to also be caring for ourselves. Sleep, rest, and recovery, all of that is important in order for us to be present, in order for us to be able to be patient enough to slow down, to even notice, why is this child pulling away from me? Why are they running away in that last example? All of that is so important for us to be more playful, to get silly with our kids, to stay open and connected. And then making time to be one-on-one with our kids, being non-productive, not having a goal in mind, but just being present, and then having that task be child-centered. So in other words, going into our child's world instead of pulling them into ours, which oftentimes children are expected to do that. And so giving them the opportunity can be so great for connecting with them and then also regulating with them. All of this front loads when it comes time to have them fulfill an expectation or follow through. It sets the tone for that and makes it much easier for them to do. And then a few top-down approaches now. We're going to look at this externally and then explicitly. How do we build these skills? So setting up the systems and routines in place. When we can externalize to-do lists, for example, sticky notes. My phone is something I rely on heavily, not only for notes and typing it in, but I am using Siri oftentimes to tell it what to. So using Siri even to speak into my phone, hey, set reminder for so and so time to do so and so. I can't rely on my working memory, which we talked about with one of the executive function skills here. So I rely externally on my tools that I have at my right at the touch of my right at my fingertips here. So setting phone alarms, having a whiteboard, my fridge when I'm in the kitchen, I'm constantly writing down whatever comes to my mind. This is sort of like a brain dump. I don't have to rely on my memory, so I'm offloading that mental load. And automating whatever you can, having a landing and launching pad in place. So your keys always go in the same area. Backpacks always gets hung up so that my kids know exactly where it is the next day. Um, for myself, whenever I have fallen out of the routine of exercise and I'm getting back in, I know it's going to be harder the next morning. So I will dress for the gym at night. So having my workout clothes on, having my gym shoes pulled out next to the door. Another system I have in place is when I'm putting away dinner, I'm also making my lunch so that it's ready in the morning. I'm decreasing all the tasks that I have in the morning so that I can be successful, my kids can be successful in getting out the door. And then some explicit skill building is um, looking at, first of all, punishment and consequence differently. When we look at punishment, it is very externally uh, given to our kids. So, and it's usually done out of our own dysregulation and frustration and anger. There's not a lot of logic or learning here. But when we can allow for consequences, this is an internal skill building here. Our kids learn for themselves instead of us imposing it on them, which makes it easier for them to integrate. So I'll give an example. My younger son, he's 6, he's neurotypical, and because of his age, he still struggles with impulse control. So one day he was trying to be playful with my older son, and he pulled him off of a ladder. My older son fell, and thankfully he was okay, but he was a little hurt. And it was very it would have been easy for me to go into punishment mode. But in that moment, I chose to pause and get curious and have my curiosity hat on. And I asked him after took care of my older son, "Hey, what was that? What was going on right there?" And younger son said, "I was trying to be funny, but it didn't work." And so for him, he learned that natural consequence right then and there when I was able to be curious. And he saw for himself that, hey, pulling my brother off of a ladder was not a good idea. And that also showed me he did not have ill intention with with my other son. So we did talk about that and we learned, hey, next time we can do things a little bit differently. And he sees like that the lack of impulse control there did cause harm to someone else. And he did feel his own sense of guilt and shame there. And then we moved through that in a way that was more helpful. He learned how to apologize and console his brother. So that was skill building right there. That was self-monitoring. That was learning impulse control. And that goes to my next step. Include your child. Include them in teaching them what executive function skills are, and then normalize mistakes. Um, model making Model what it looks like to uh, give grace to yourself when you make mistakes, and then model what it looks like to repair. So in that last example, my son learned how to make a repair with my older son. And then also, I love teaching kids, my own kids, my kids I work with, about their brain. So when we lean into neuroscience, showing them what how their brain works, giving them names to parts of their brain. My two favorite parts are the amygdala, which is our limbic system that controls fight or flight. So instead of asking my kids, "How are you feeling today?" I might say, "How's your amygdala today?" First is something that's novel. It's something that's explicit because we've learned about it. And then it's also something concrete and tangible. We've looked at a book where it shows the amygdala, so they can reference that. Um, and it also gives us a sense of normalizing that sometimes I lose my cool, and I can name that by saying, "Oh, my amygdala got the best of me," and then go from there and make a repair. Or even our hippocampus. I'll say, "You know what? My hippocampus isn't working well today, so my memory is just not that great. I'm gonna write things down so I don't forget." So all of that normalizes to our kids what it looks like for our brains to work not as well in one moment, because that happens to the best of us. And then vary your experiences and generalize these skills that you're building. We tend to focus on their deficits versus their strengths. So when you can vary their experiences to learn, and when you can build in their strengths and interests, that goes such a long way. Um, for many of my kids who can be adverse to learning hard things or challenging things, when I can just pull in something that they enjoy, whether it's Minecraft, whether it's astronomy, whether it's hunting, it's just even talking about the subject and relating it to what we're doing currently makes such a big difference because, again, we're entering into their world and not just yanking them into ours and our own expectations. And a couple more things, use visuals to avoid overload and shut down. Anytime we can use graphics and visual cues, we are offloading their mental load there. So having a picture of a clean room instead of saying, "Hey, clean your room," will again give them something more concrete and something more predictable uh, to follow through with. Even breaking down that task, if you have a picture of a clean room, circling what part they're to clean instead of the whole room is a way of scaffolding and breaking down tasks to make it smaller and more manageable for your kids. And then let's talk about evening homework because that's really fun. Not evening homework. how do we scaffold this for our kids? Again, task initiation is a executive function skill that so many kids and people start with. It involves emotional regulation because we're having to overcome our own barrier of the discomfort of doing something challenging. We're having to overcome procrastination because that challenge, that task just seems so big and just so big. So how do we get our kids to take that first step? And sometimes it could be the first step is taking our pencil and our uh, taking out our paper and folder and putting it on the desk. Praising the heck out of your kids for doing that. Hey, thanks for getting your stuff out. It looks like you're getting ready. I appreciate that. And then from there, scaffolding. Okay, let's do this step now, and then this step. And the point of scaffolding is to not always be that structured, but to notice your child. Where are they gaining independence, and then fading your scaffoldings or fading your help so that they're gaining independence versus having learned helplessness. So a lot of times that may look like body doubling, being with your kids just to get them started. And if you see that they are now focused and engaged, then you can back off a little bit. And you can even say, hey, I'm going to be in the kitchen for a few minutes. I'll come back if you need, or I'll come back in 10 minutes. And again, being a body double to help them maintain that attention, but also letting them know you're there to help if you need. Something else with homework is not just body doubling, but just having a checklist. What does quote unquote finished look like? So if they have 3 subjects, you may have a list of those 3 subjects. Or if you want to break it down more, have just that one subject of homework, but then list out the steps to complete that one homework assignment. So if it's a written paper, the steps could look like 1, having an outline. Step 2, researching the notes. Step 3, putting those notes in order. Step 4, writing. Step 5, proofing it. So again, there's no right or wrong way. There's no black or white. It comes through collaboration and just trialing what works and what doesn't work. And even showing your child what doesn't work, and let's think of something else, is pivoting and showing flexibility there. So you're building skills no matter what. Something I really like to use, and I've used this more and more, is having a rubric. We underestimate what kids are supposed to know. For example, some kids, we might say, hey, do this neatly. What does neatly look like? When I started using a rubric with a few of my kids, they started to make a lot of progress with just having neat homework. So I would ask them, what does neat handwriting look like? And we would do this together. And for one of my kids, it was writing with spaces in between their words, writing on the line or inside of the guidelines, um, having punctuation marks, having capitalization where needed. And so we would use this rubric before the actual task each and every time. And then as we noticed his homework getting neater and neater, we were fading the use of the rubrics. And then each time, however, we would still verbally say, hey, what does it mean to have neat homework? And then he would verbally recall and state what those were. And so that is an example of scaffolding even. We had the rubric, but then we're fading its use because he was starting to integrate and learn and remember to monitor his own handwriting to do it neatly. I've used rubrics for everything for fidget use. So for example, how do you use fidgets appropriately? Because I love the use of rubrics. I mean, I'm sorry, fidgets, but some teachers don't because it can be distracting and it could also be um, disruptive. And I completely empathize with them. Sometimes when kids have something novel, it does engage more of their attention. It can be more disruptive, let's say if they're throwing it or if it takes too much of their primary attention. So using a rubric before giving them a fidget can be very helpful when you go over the guidelines. And this takes repeated action as well. So asking my kids each time I give them a fidget, okay, what are the rules for it? Okay, uh, you can use it. You can use it with your hands. You can use it in your lap. Uh, if it's distracting, we need to think of something else, whether it's a different fidget or to put away for a few minutes. And having them state that back is always very helpful because it also reinforces those skills for them and those rules. And then lastly, two last things, having a calm down zone in your room, whether it's at home, at school, if you're a teacher, gives the child an opportunity to regroup if they are having a hard time with emotional regulation. We need to anticipate that they will have trouble with emotional regulation at times. Everyone does, especially kids that have, like I said, that 30% delay in executive function skills where they're still learning to manage their emotions. So having a calm down area gives them first, it normalizes the fact that we all need it and that it's okay for them to use. And then also helping them to anticipate when they may need it. So during let's say transitions to and from recess, after recess, it may be harder to regroup. So having a time to decompress before coming back to an assignment may help. At home, it could be an area, let's say under the kitchen table, in their bedroom, in a quiet area of the living room, and then having things that are comfort items for them. It could be a cozy blanket, books, something to make, for example, a bracelet, or something to sense. So using their sensory systems, something that may smell very pleasing to them. And this depends on some kids. They may be sensitive to smells or they may enjoy it. So again, having to just observe your child to see what they need and what they like. And this goes to my last suggestion here is having a sensory diet or an idea of sensory activities that helps your child to regulate. So as I said before, having calm down zone with like comfort items that appeals to their sensory needs, but also throughout the day, what gets them to an optimal area of learning and regulation. So if you see your child seeking a lot of input, so for my younger son, a lot of flipping, a lot of crashing, running into people, then I'm going to give him that sensory input through making him into a human sandwich using pillows, a human burrito using a blanket to wrap him up tightly, deep hugs, um, playing with him and engaging with him and doing frog jumps or racing just to get that energy out of his body. And then alternatively, if you see your child just very lethargic and he needs to maybe alert himself for homework, then you may do some input that is more alerting. So those same activities that I just mentioned can also be used here. Proprioceptive input, which are what we just mentioned, can be both alerting and calming, which is pretty neat and a great go-to. But other alternatives for alerting may be vestibular, so movement like swinging, spinning around, all of that can alert the nervous system to get them ready for something like homework, um, things that they are more cognitively demanding. Other ideas for sensory input, especially in this classroom, is um, a lot of times we hear about alternative seating as an accommodation. This doesn't necessarily mean where they sit at in the classroom, but it could also mean how they're sitting or allowed to finish their task. So having an air cushion in their chair gives a little bit of movement while still sitting. Having their bands around the chair legs lets them kick their legs and gets that resistance and movement. Having them even stand at their table with their homework on top of a box lets them sit or stand up for a little bit of movement. So they're still able to perform the task, but they're able to do it in a way that gives their body the feedback it needs to maintain their attention. Um, I've been in classrooms where kids were allowed to lie on the ground to do their work, which is great. I've seen them in quiet air, their calm down zones to do homework, again, which gives them flexibility for where they choose to do their work so that they can focus, but also uh, maintain just their, also maintain the sensory needs there. So I hope this is all helpful and I appreciate you guys listening. We'll talk to you next time.